Hello, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to January's executive meeting. First item would normally be to record any apologies, but all the councillors that we're expecting are here today, so welcome to them, and equally those participating in the meeting and those watching the meeting at home now or after it's been recorded. First agenda item is declarations of interest. Before I take that item, I'd just like to confirm the note on the agenda, which is that our meetings during January are going to be held remotely, and any decisions made from today's meeting will form recommendations to the Chief Operating Officer, who will then make the formal decision. And that agreement to have remote meetings will continue to be reviewed as we approach the end of January. The first agenda item is declarations of interest. Can I ask colleagues if you have any declarations to raise your electronic hands, so I then know to bring you in at the right part of the meeting. Councillor Eyre.
Just for transparency, Chair, to note on my register of interest, I'm employed by Healthwatch Bradford, and I have had some involvement with the development of the Integrated Care Board in West Yorkshire, but I've had no involvement with any of the developments in Humber Coast and Vale. Thank you very much. Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. Again, not a declaration of interest really, but for transparency, just to say that in relation to items 8 and 9, I am one of the 3 councillors for Guildhall Ward, which is subject to those items. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smalley.
Again, the theme, again, I'm not an interest, but for transparency. As per my register of interests, I'm a parish councillor on Clifton Without Parish Council and ward councillor for Rawcliffe and Clifton Without, and I'm just saying that in relation to item 12, the Future Libraries Investment Programme.
Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to item 12, I'm ward councillor for Westfield, in which Acomb Explore Library.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to item 12, for transparency, I should declare that I am a member of the Explore users community, the trust, I can't remember what it's called, and that I'm a user of Haxby and Wigginton Library when it exists, and I'm also a ward councillor for Haxby and Wigginton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I cannot see any further hands raised, so thank you for those. That moves us on to agenda item 2, which is the exclusion of press and public. And this is to consider the exclusion of the press and the public from the meeting during the consideration of various annexes of agenda item 12, the Future Libraries Programme, on the grounds that they contain information relating to the financial or business affairs of particular persons. As normal, I would suggest to colleagues that we try and avoid discussing the details in the annex so that we can remain in public at all times. But if we do, I'll ask for you to agree that exclusion of the press and the public. If I could please see a show of hands to confirm that you're happy with that. Thank you very much. That's a clear consensus in favour of excluding the press and the public if we discuss those annexes of agenda item 12. That takes us on to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of our last meeting, and these are included between pages 1 to 34. And again, I'd like to ask colleagues if they are content with us signing off those minutes with a show of hands, please. Thank you very much. So a clear majority in favour of signing off those minutes. And what I should say, like the start of the meeting, when we're talking in terms of signing off those minutes or agreeing that recommendation, that will form a recommendation to the Chief Operating Officer, who formally will then do that after the virtual meeting. Item 4 is public participation. We have 10 public speakers at today's meeting. on a variety of topics. I'd like to thank all of those public speakers in advance. I'd also like to note at this stage that we've received a number of written comments, and thank you to those that have submitted those written comments. And I'd just like to note in the minutes that they've been circulated to all executive members in advance, so that those written comments alongside the public speakers can be considered when we get to the relevant agenda items later in the meeting. Our first public speaker today is Alexandra Howe, who has registered to speak on agenda item 8, City Centre Access Security Measures. And hopefully you can hear me, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Hi.
Hello.
I would, as a resident of the city centre with vehicle access at the minute, I would like to know what the council is going to do for me. Because obviously, as a local resident, I don't pose any hostile threat to the town centre at all to come through. And also looking at the laws on access, you can't, by law, refuse entry or exit to someone's private property at any time. And so it just, if the council can consider what they're going to do for us to help us live our lives once this whole security measures are put in place. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments, and we'll take them into account when we consider agenda item 8. Our second registered public speaker today is Flick Williams, who's also registered to speak on agenda item 8, City Centre Access. And again, you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Yes, hello. Speaking as myself. Elected members, the council is repeatedly telling the media and thereby its citizens that blue badge holders have been excluded from the foot streets in order to achieve hostile vehicle mitigation. The Martin Higgett Associates report details no less than 4 alternative schemes that would achieve it while still allowing disabled people to use their essential vehicles, be that private car or taxi, to their destination. But just like the proposed cycle spine route, these were all rejected out of hand, without meaningful exploration, and certainly without proper scrutiny. So please stop with the "we did it because the police told us to." It's a political decision that you need to own. The creation of a so-called sterile zone is unachievable, and just like LTNs nationally, simply shifts the problems and risk geographically, usually to be borne by the most disadvantaged and marginalised in society. You have opted for what you anticipated would be the path of least resistance in managing an unquantifiable risk. You won't find the way to alternative solutions where there is no will to do so. And where are we now? We see blue badge holders parked in Deangate being given parking tickets when we were told this was a reasonable adjustment. We see local disabled people having to endlessly drive around trying to find an accessible space close enough to use, doing nothing for emissions and cleaner air, eventually giving up and going elsewhere. We see disabled tourists writing on social media that they, after their appalling experiences of access in December, they and their money are never coming back. And to add insult to the injury of our exclusion, no barriers were in operation on the 24th of December when the streets were packed with people. Wouldn't that have been the perfect time for some lone wolf with martyrdom on their mind to mount an attack on the second seat of the Church of England? Your anti-terror measures are devoid of coherence or consistency. To Green councillors, I say, whatever happened to no climate justice without social justice?
30 seconds.
To Liberal Democrat councillors, I say, I joined York Liberal students at the university in 1983. Your actions render me politically homeless. To both, I say, remember permanent lasts only as long as one administration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account when we consider agenda item 8. Our third public speaker today is Anne Norton, also registered to speak on agenda item 8, City Centre and Access, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Hello, I'm speaking on behalf of York Disability Rights Forum on agenda point 8. I will comment briefly on the existing temporary measures as they are already causing access issues, and recommendation point F calls for extending the staffing of the current barriers. An incident reported on Twitter on the 22nd of November 2021 tells of a lady in a wheelchair being denied access through the manned on-street barrier by the Minster. The temporary ramp in place was not suitable for her wheelchair and the barrier blocked the street. What training is being given to those manning the barriers, and why is opening the barriers for a wheelchair user not allowed? Why is the ramp access provided not fit for purpose? What measures and money has been put aside to install dropped curbs around the barriers? Until these are in place, wheelchair users should be allowed to pass through the manned barriers. This raises the question of safety. In the event of a terror attack, it appears a wheelchair user could become stranded behind a barrier inside the Foot Street area and unable to evacuate. This also begs the question, if there is money available to staff the barriers, then why can't Blue Badge users access the Foot Streets area via these staffed barriers and show their blue badges upon entry? This would be a simple solution and is something that was recommended in the Martin Higgett report commissioned by the City of York Council. The police letter Annex D notes responsibilities under Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which is also listed in the Equalities Impact Assessment Annex C. I would like to point out that the Convention demands other responsibilities, particularly Article 14, the prohibition of discrimination. It is extremely concerning that this is not even mentioned in the Equalities Assessment, when it is clear that the current measures and the proposed new measures are impacting York's disabled residents. Quickly highlight a few of the issues of concern in the Equalities Assessment. 1.3. Stakeholders include the disabled residents of York, and they are not specifically listed in an equalities document. 2.1. Surveys were carried out. No specific numbers of Blue Badge users are listed, or the distances from Parking Place to the city centre and how the proposals affect that. 3.1. On discussing impact, there is nothing about monitoring impact on the disabled community and how this might feed back into the adjustment of anti-terror measures. 4.1. Disability. This entire section is concerning. Listing points without suggesting mitigation does not make the problem go away. And 6.1. It is extremely concerning that no potential for adverse impact is stated when it is clear that this is an issue affecting residents. Finally, I know that speaker slots for this session were oversubscribed, and those without slots were given a chance to make written submissions. Will these be made publicly available and added into the minutes of the meeting? The oversubscribed nature shows that the Council have not got this issue right, and stating they have a good relationship with the disabled community does not mean that they do. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, and that we'll consider when we get to agenda item 8. But just to quickly confirm for the record, I'm more than happy for the written comments to be attached to the minutes of the meeting when published to show what's been circulated around to executive members. Our fifth public speaker today is Tracy Austell. In fact, sorry, I've moved too quickly. Our fourth public speaker today is Jane Burton. Apologies, Jane, who's registered to speak on agenda item 8, City Centre Access, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Good evening. I'm speaking on behalf of York Accessibility Action. The situation is bringing national shame upon the Council. Look North, Calendar News and Sky have all covered the issues, along with national and local newspapers. Human rights groups and national disability organisations have also spoken out. However, it is still not too late to reconsider the discriminatory stance taken and to undertake meaningful negotiation with local DPOs to radically improve the mitigations necessary to reopen the city to its largest protected minority group, the disabled residents and visitors to York. Apart from saving its reputation, this change of heart, even at this late stage, would save the council from using money it can ill afford to spend on legal defence fees and fines, as legal action is now imminent. It is lazy not to offer proper mitigations. There has been an unwillingness to implement the recommendations from multiple organisations, including the excellent report it commissioned from Martin Higgett and Associates. Of course, disabled people are all for keeping our streets safe from terrorist attacks. We would be foolish not to. But how can York use this as an excuse to exclude disabled residents when other cities have hostile vehicle mitigation areas and still maintain access for blue badge holders? Chester and Bath are just two good examples. Why can't York ask advice? Bath have now changed their position. There is nothing to stop York doing the same and allowing this apartheid situation to be brought to an end. The introduction of staffed entry barriers in York would allow entry to a private car registered as disabled or a taxi taking a blue badge holder. The technology already exists. It really is not rocket science. York is allowing access into the streets for many vehicles who have a waiver. So why is there such intransigence? We sincerely hope that it is not disguising a policy of a car-free city at any cost. The real cost here is to grandparents who can't join their family celebrations in city centre restaurants because they can't walk the long distances that the very late 8 p.m. curfew has imposed on them. Parents whose children are disabled are not able to get into town with their children as they need constant access to their vehicles, which include vital medical equipment.
30 seconds.
Visually impaired people who are now lost in unfamiliar streets and have to call for help. Disabled people of all ages are unable to enjoy the very accessible city screen. People unable to access the main post office in Coney Street, visit their banks, dentists, optician, hairdressers, or favourite shops. These same people, their families and friends, will remember how they have been excluded when it comes time to vote in 2023. I urge you to listen to all the statements we're making tonight and have made since the ban was initially imposed in June 2020, and to think again. Please spare us all from the damaged reputation.
Thank you very much. If you could draw your comments to a close, please.
That's my speech. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, and we'll take into account your comments when we consider agenda item 8. Our fifth public speaker today is Tracy Austell, who's registered to speak on agenda item 9, the Groves, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Hi there, thanks for letting me come in on this. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes, thank you.
Yeah, lovely. So I'm still on traffic, I'm afraid. It's the Groves traffic scheme that I've been having some issues with. Although I'm aware I get the reason why the traffic scheme was trialled and everything. Areas such that seem to be the main areas that discussed Lowther Street and Penley Grove Street, the main streets through the Groves. The area that I'm at is blocked off, which is right outside my house, which is Earl Street to Amber Street. It's caused major issues around this area. I've never had a problem in 26 years with the traffic going through here. But with the blockages, it's caused so much damage. I'm really quite amazed. We've had problems with traffic getting through its mini delivery vans, the dustbin drivers. They just cannot get through because the thoroughfare has been stopped, so they have to turn around in very narrow streets where they're creating damage on the pavements, they're creating damage on people's driveways, cars are getting damaged with them having to turn round. The blockage has caused one parking bay to be blocked off. That's caused issues with parking where people are now parking illegally, which includes outside my garage. So I'm unable to often get outside of my garage when I need my car out. I'm unable to get quickly my car out of the garage. I have to go through a different way through Haxby Road to get in and out to my home. It's also causing problems with builders. They're refusing to actually come and drop building materials off now in the area due to the issues with getting in and out of certainly Amber Street and Earl Street. It's really causing a lot of difficulties. It's causing more pollution. I work from home like probably a lot of you guys are doing now, and the beeping, the constant beeping of traffic turning around, people are arguing, it's constant noise. Pollution, obviously, that's increased outside my house, certainly. And I suppose the last thing to really say is I know that with the antisocial behaviour that has increased in the Groves area, the police have got difficulty with accessing. We have drug running around here. The police, to get to those drug runners on the push bikes, they're flitting through all these bollards. That causes another difficulty. And I do know of one person up the street from me who had an ambulance delayed, that they couldn't get through to. They had to carry on a stretcher up an entire street to get to the ambulance. So that is obviously very concerning. And I think that's really all I have to say about that. Okay, thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much for your comments, and we'll take them into account when we consider agenda item 9 later. Our sixth public speaker today is Angela Reynard-Pierce, who's registered to speak on agenda item 12, the Future Libraries Investment Programme, and you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. Hello. This afternoon, my two neighbours and myself are discussing the proposals for the Clifton Without Junior School site and reasons to retain the hedge on Fairway. The hedge is over 100 metres long, mature and species rich. It has been there for at least 60 years, and we believe parts of it are over 80 years old. Governments around the world, together with avid campaigners such as David Attenborough, are working to battle climate change. For this reason, for this to happen, everybody must play their part, including the building industry and city councillors. Our trees and hedges are vital commodities in reducing CO2 emissions, especially in those areas with busy roads such as Rawcliffe Lane and Fairway around school drop-off and pick-up times. Hedges absorb the worst air pollutants, capturing the dust from exhaust fumes. Pollution is a major concern for locals with asthma and my son, who has cystic fibrosis and whose room is looking directly over the proposed building site. I'm already extremely concerned about the dust that will be generated during the building work. Keeping the hedges and the trees as a screen would offer some protection against this dust. Furthermore, with climate changes, heavy downpours are more frequent. Our neighbouring streets already have flood issues, and the more we cover the land with concrete, the greater the damage caused. Hedges and their roots let rain gradually soak away and absorb moisture. Therefore, we're proposing that the hedge is retained as part of the sale of the land. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account when we consider agenda item 12. Our seventh public speaker today is Anne Leonard, who's also registered to speak on agenda item 12, Future Libraries Investment, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Thank you. Good evening. Local authorities are fully aware of the crisis in social care and the current dearth of appropriate housing and social provision for our growing population of elderly people. In the course of the public consultation on Clifton Library redevelopment, a new plan emerged for the housing development on the former school site that both addresses the problem of the unmet housing and social needs of older people and exploits more completely the possibilities opened up by the development of the library as an inclusive social hub. The parish council has decided to retain the existing very popular play park, so the area on the old school site that was scheduled as a play park has been freed up. The suggestion that emerged from discussions in the local community is to develop that space as a site for housing for elderly people. The location would provide easy access to all the new library facilities and activities, enabling residents to remain active members of the community and more fully developing and exploiting the potential of the library as a social hub. There may also be potential for mutually beneficial links with the adjacent school, Vale of York Academy. The utilisation of the corner site for housing would facilitate the retention of the existing trees and the wildlife site that has developed along the edge of the old school site, providing a further benefit for both elderly residents and users of the library site. Informal discussion post-consultation with local residents has generated innovative, imaginative ideas that could be realised both socially and architecturally to enhance York's physical, social and cultural environment and carry on a tradition that dates back to the developments of round trees and terrace. The local community has clearly demonstrated the commitment to working with the local authority on this development. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account when we get to agenda item 12. Our 8th public speaker today is Andy Dearden, who's registered on that same item, the Future Libraries Investment Programme, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Hello, I'm also talking about the Clifton Without Junior School site. And it strikes me that we, my neighbours and I, shouldn't be speaking at this meeting. We shouldn't have needed a petition. We've been talking to City of York Council through the consultation process for 5 months, and we've been talking about the hedge and the tree throughout that process. But from this meeting's agenda, you'd be forgiven for not even knowing that there was a hedge there. In our written submission, you can see how the land identified for housing has changed and evolved through your consultation process. It's easy. The lines don't move. Somewhere in the machinery and bureaucracy of the council that's meant to inform you about citizens' priorities, the value of this environmental feature has got completely lost. Well, not quite. The revised proposals do include a small area surrounded by the building, the housing, and the car park, and it's designated as a wildlife habitat area. The wildlife won't even know it's there. There's a word for this sort of thing. It's greenwash. You know from experience of the planning process, it's too weak to protect important features of the natural environment. You know that tree protection orders don't really protect trees. If you sell the land as currently proposed in the agenda, the new owner can rip out the hedge without seeking yours or anybody else's permission because the hedge centre line is on their land. Even if you make retaining the hedge a condition of sale, a developer could argue that cutting out huge sections is essential to make their project financially viable. This executive cannot safely delegate the responsibility for protecting that hedge to the vagaries of internal bureaucracy and the planning process. You need to take the hedge
30 seconds.
out. You need to take the hedge out of the equation, and you need to do it here in this meeting. Local people are excited about the library. We recognise the need for social housing, but you can come up with better layouts. Talk to us. Let's get engaged. Let's create something that's really valuable for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And your comments will be taken into account when we consider agenda item 12. Our 9th public speaker today is Sarah Garbacek, who is also registered on agenda item 12, Future Libraries Investment Programme, and is the Chief Operating Officer of Explore York Libraries and Archives. You have 3 minutes.
I'm here representing Explore York Libraries and Archives, as you've mentioned, we're contracted to deliver the Library and Archive service on behalf of the Council. We absolutely welcome this potential significant investment of £7 million in libraries, and thanks to the executive for recognising the vital and relevant role that libraries continue to play in York's communities. This investment will enable us to continue to develop and deliver Explore's vision in the 3 key York communities of Clifton, Acomb and Haxby and Wigginton. Explore's vision is about working with communities to create safe, accessible, welcoming spaces that are relevant to and have a purpose for everyone within that community. We work with residents to create spaces for them to meet, to try new things, to engage in creative activity, to learn new skills, and of course to put them in touch with books to inspire and inform. So our spaces need to be designed flexibly to perform a multitude of different functions, from the person who needs one-to-one free digital support to help them get a job, to the person who wants to see a high-quality cultural performance on their doorstep. From parents who want a fun, lively environment for their child to experience their first creative activity, to that group who just need an informal space to chat, meet up and share ideas. Our vision includes working with partner organisations who add value to our offer. This might be sharing our spaces as tenants within our buildings, working with us to enable us to do more, or it might be sharing our spaces on a more ad hoc basis to bring typically city centre services to local residents, meaning we are real social hubs and focal points for activity in the local community. Whilst our current libraries at Haxby and Wigginton and Clifton enable us to do this now, the proposed investment will enable us to deliver and support the local community so much more. In 2001, we led a number of engagement sessions in Clifton and Haxby and Wigginton, and support for the proposed development of new libraries in both communities was overwhelming. Roughly 90% of people who took part in the consultation in both instances were in support of the projects. Residents in both communities have remained really engaged at each stage, and I personally have had fabulous continuing conversations with local residents on what they'd like to see being delivered by their library, when they'd like to access us and use us, how they want to support us, and also strong views around where they'd like to see improvements, all of which will help us enormously if we move on to the next stage, and actually just in terms of developing our services generally. And we'll hopefully be continuing those conversations following the decision tonight too. In terms of Acomb, we already have a successful, vibrant, thriving library learning centre in Acomb with year-on-year growth pre-pandemic since its opening in 2007. And Explore will be leading the conversation with residents there later on this year on how we can continue to grow our vision in Acomb. By doing what we do, we as Explore have demonstrated that libraries are very relevant in supporting and enabling growth and resilience in local communities, and by potentially investing in these libraries, City of York Council will enable us to build on and continue that success and make a difference to our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account when we consider the agenda item. Our 10th public speaker today is Anne Stamp, who's also registered on agenda item 12 Future Libraries programme on the benefits of Snappy as part of the project. You have 3 minutes. I can't hear you yet, just in case you haven't pressed.
I am unmuted now, sorry.
We can hear you.
Hi, my name is Anne Stamp and I'm the service manager with Snappy in York. We look after children and young adults with wide-ranging disabilities. We're absolutely delighted to hear about the Clifton Library project because there's an opportunity for us to be one of the partners in there. And this will give the Snappy children, all 300 of them and their families, an opportunity to work with partners that we've never been able to work with before, to offer projects that we've never been able to offer before. And I hope to work with the local community through volunteering, through fundraising, and through some of our learning resources. So I just wanted to come along and say, yeah, we're absolutely delighted and we're so excited about this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account when we consider agenda item 12. So I'd just like to thank all of our public participants and those who submitted written comments. And as I confirmed, as well as circulating those comments, we'll attach those to the minutes after the meeting as well. That then takes us through to the next agenda item, which is the forward plan on pages 35 to 36. I'll give a couple of seconds in case colleagues have any issues to raise, and then I'll ask for a show of hands to indicate that you're happy to support the forward plan. So I'll give a couple more seconds, but that's a clear majority in favour of accepting the forward plan. Thank you very much. That then takes us straight on to agenda item 6, which is an update including support to businesses, and that starts on page 36. And I'll hand over to Ian to introduce this report to us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So obviously this provides a report in terms of the latest surge in COVID cases from the latest variant, and clearly the report set out where information was at the time. Just to give a brief update in terms of the very latest position. So in terms of case numbers, the case numbers increased from the figures you can see in the report and got to around about 1,600, 1,700 figure. They have started to come down a little bit, and so currently we are at around about 1,300 per 100,000. Now clearly that's still a high level. Hopefully the numbers will continue to fall further. Clearly children have just gone back to school, which is a slight risk, but we are hopeful that numbers will reduce. You will have seen on the media that the general position is that whilst this is a very contagious virus, and lots of people are clearly catching it, all the signs are is less severe, but clearly for some people it is still a very dangerous virus, and the hospitals are seeing increases in admission, not to the level that they were seen when we have seen previous peaks, and certainly not to the severity in terms of individuals, but clearly it is still for some people, as I say, a significant virus which can cause severe illness. Just in terms of the impact on the council in terms of staffing, we have seen a bit of an increase clearly in terms of the numbers of staff who are off sick through COVID. However, that hasn't been to a level that we can't manage, and so currently we have around about 2% of our staff off with COVID. Our total staff absence is around 7% at the moment. So you can see that actually non-COVID, which is the other sort of 5%, is actually greater than COVID. We've also had, and it probably links to the fact that this variant is not as severe, we do have a number of people who actually have had the virus but have continued to work. So that does sort of indicate what I've been saying. I think the other thing I would just note is obviously there's a lot of information in the report around the new government grants that we need to distribute, and I'll hand over in a second to Pauline, who'll just take you through a little bit of that. Just to note also, and Pauline will take you through this, there are some slight amendments we'd like to make to the recommendations. So I'll stop at that point, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. As the report outlines, the government has announced 4 new funding streams for support to businesses in response to the latest wave of COVID infection. Clarification of final details on all grant schemes are were yet to be received at the time of writing the report, but we've now received more information since publication that will change the related recommendations in the report. So in relation to the hospitality and leisure grant, this has now been confirmed at £4.2 million for distribution to businesses in York. This is a grant scheme specified by government as per the rateable values contained in table 1 at paragraph 18. So executive are asked to approve this, and we will, on the basis of that approval, we'll launch that scheme tomorrow. In relation to the Cultural Recovery Fund mentioned in paragraph 20, this is not to be delivered by the council, but will be delivered by the Arts Council England, and that will be by application directly to them. So executive are asked to note this information only, and no approvals are required in relation to that particular grant. So this leaves two schemes that are currently being drafted, and delegated approvals, as outlined in paragraph 21, are sought to allow schemes to go live as soon as they've been finalised. They will then be presented in public to the executive member for finance performance decision session that will be held on the 13th of February for transparency. Those two schemes are firstly, the COVID Additional Relief Fund, and that is a rate relief, a business rate relief to be awarded to businesses affected by the pandemic that did not receive previous support linked to business rates. We are working hard on identifying the companies that will benefit and by how much. It is anticipated that this will be the next scheme to be agreed and will go live in the next week. And the final scheme is the Additional Restrictions Grant. Total funding to York is now confirmed at £300,786. This will be a discretionary scheme for us to design to support businesses that have been severely impacted by the current coronavirus restrictions and the rise of the Omicron variant. This will take a little longer to design and finalise, and we will communicate details to businesses and on our website as soon as details have been agreed and approved. So members are now asked to approve recommendation B only for the Additional Restrictions Grant on the COVID Additional Relief Fund, and agree two new recommendations. Recommendation C is to approve the distribution of the Hospitality and Leisure Grant in accordance with the government's prescribed scheme, and recommendation D is a new recommendation to note that the Arts Council England are responsible for the distribution of the Cultural Recovery Fund on application. Myself and David Walker are here to answer any questions, Chair, but before that, David will run through the dates and deadlines for the schemes, if that's helpful to Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the Hospitality and Leisure Scheme, grant scheme, that scheme has a cut-off date of the 28th of February, with all payments having to be made by 31st of March, hence why we intend to get the application process running tomorrow. As Pauline said, there's approximately 1,600 businesses in that scheme that we've identified because we've dealt with them before in previous schemes, so we can write to them all, and £4.2 million for the grant. In terms of the COVID Additional Relief Fund, this is slightly different to the traditional schemes that we've seen over the last 2 years. This is not actually a grant as such, it's a relief on business rates for businesses that's not received any support across the last 2 years of the COVID virus. That scheme hasn't a closing date at the end of March. Basically, though, the award of relief has to be in the 21-22 year, so any reliefs we're giving out for this financial year. It makes it slightly complex because what that will do is it will apply £4.8 million worth of relief to businesses, most of whom have paid their business rate, so it will put them into credit. So we need to understand whether or not those businesses will roll the credit into 22-23 or will ask for refunds. The other added complexity is we then refunded through Section 31 grants, so it just makes it a little bit messy around year end when the funding comes in and when we make those payments. Just in terms of who's in there, it's mainly factories, offices, warehouses, and we've identified in the base around 1,000 businesses that would qualify. And as Pauline said, we'll try and get a scheme out in the next week. In terms of the Additional Restrictions Grant, similar to the OHLG, it's got to be spent by 31st of March. The only difference is there isn't a cut-off date of the 28th of Feb, so we have literally till the 31st of March to spend it, and it has to be a direct grant. So where previously AIG we've been able to give support in other ways, the £300,000 has to be spent directly with businesses in the form of a grant. So that's how the schemes will operate, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, David. So I'll open the agenda item up for any questions or comments, and I'd obviously like to thank Ian, Pauline and David for that introduction. Before I take some comments, I'll just add a couple of things myself. I think that, as has just been explained to us, the rise of the Omicron variant has been widely covered and documented locally and in the national media, having first been declared by the World Health Organization back at the end of November now. And in York, like most of the UK, that has become the dominant variant. And we heard a little bit about the case rate earlier. And over the last week, that equated to about 3,000 new cases. When you compare that to the data in paragraph 7, we can see that there has already been a small decline in the number of new cases when compared to before the new year. Although the number of new COVID cases is still a concern, York's rate of infection does remain both below the regional and national averages. Nonetheless, it is important, again, for all of us to stress that this remains an incredibly difficult period for our local health services, both locally and nationally, that remain under considerable pressure. And as mentioned in the report, hospital admissions are increasing, but not at the same rate as infections, which is absolutely crucial. The council, I know, will continue to support communities and partners across the city by promoting the latest public health guidance through our ongoing winter campaign, as well as providing that enhanced support that we heard about, whether that be to businesses, to schools, or to other education settings. I know that Councillor Waller is next to speak, and I'm sure will want to say a few words around support for businesses. And what I would say is that whilst that additional funding is, of course, really welcome, we do need clarity and certainty over long-term funding streams rather than just one-off pots of money. I'll stop there, as said, and open it up for any questions, but I am content to note the report and suggest that we approve the delegations as recommended in paragraphs 4A and 4B. And on that, Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. We know that December turned into being a very challenging time for many businesses in the city, with the Omicron variant spreading at what had been hoped to be a time, a busy Christmas, to help generate the funds to see them through the quieter months in the first quarter. And so businesses were challenged with getting staffing numbers and also recruitment. So there had been a lot of effort into making York successful. So following the concerns expressed to me by businesses in the city, worried about cancellation of bookings and the business leading up to Christmas, I did write to the Chancellor on the 14th of December when there was concern there wouldn't be a national support scheme for those businesses that were worried. Clearly, the additional funds in the end were announced ahead of Christmas and were welcome, with the caution that it wasn't quite clear how much or who would benefit, and it's not as comprehensive as anticipated. But I'd like to thank all of the staff who've worked very hard to get funds out of the door into businesses as quickly as possible. And there is always a delay between a ministerial announcement and the arrival of the mechanisms and the descriptions on how the government expects us to administer that. There's a number of different moving parts in this report, and the COVID-19 Additional Relief Fund, which was announced on the 25th of March 2021, this will benefit some businesses, but they really ought to have had this money last summer, and it will create an element of confusion. So I would hope that businesses will look at the weekly bulletins that we send out and the council website, really to explain why it is that some businesses over others are receiving this, and that it isn't a grant, as David Water explained. It's relief on existing payments for business rates. So again, as a council, we've lobbied for businesses who've come to us to explain that they're not covered by government schemes. So we just need to work to ensure that people understand this, and that the funding that's being released now will take some different announcements or as they're released into the system. And so we would ask for patience, because it's still the same small group of dedicated people trying to administer this. And we do want them to be able to get the money to the businesses that need that. So in general, when businesses are concerned that they're being missed out, as has been the case throughout the pandemic, we would encourage them to contact the email address that we've used throughout, which is economicgrowth@york.gov.uk, as a single point to get information into the council, so that we can utilise that to identify that we will lobby on their behalf, pass on the details of the sector needing assistance to government and the local enterprise partnership, to ensure that jobs are saved. And I think that has to be the priority throughout. So whilst this new support is welcome, it is quite confusing. There will be a huge amount of work to be gone through. And each time there is a government scheme, it's slightly different to the previous ones. And so whereas in previous schemes, if you've previously received a grant, it was rolled forward, this will not be the case. And I think it'd be helpful, David, if you can just confirm that businesses will need to apply, even if in previous instances they'd automatically been sent the funds to which they were entitled. Thank you.
Yes, I can confirm that businesses do need to apply. That there are businesses that we have paid before, but because of the way the scheme operates, they'll need to do a declaration around subsidy, which is to make sure that they're eligible to the money. But we are trying to make it as simple as possible for the businesses, so they literally just need to go on, fill in their details, and we will do the declaration, and we will do the rest for them. But you are right, it can be confusing. And if businesses are concerned that they've been missed in any way, then they do need to contact us.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waller and David, for that response. I haven't got any further indications to speak, and we've got the recommendations in front of us between pages 37 and 42. Can I please see all colleagues that are happy to recommend that we accept those? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of that. Thank you. That then takes us on to agenda item 7, which is national reforms to the NHS and the impact on the council. And that starts on page 43 and runs to page 102. And I can see that Peter is with us, so I'll hand straight over to you.
Thanks very much, Chair. So the paper is to bring to members' attention and brief you all on the NHS reforms or the health and care reforms that are currently going through Parliament. The first thing to update on since the paper was written and published is that the dates of these reforms have recently been amended. The NHS planning guidance coming just before Christmas had a delay to this reform, partly due to the NHS being on the alert level 4 around the Omicron virus, and partly due to delays in the parliamentary proceedings for the bill. So the paper refers to a date of this all coming into force April 2022. It is in fact the 1st of July 2022 that we are talking about here. In terms of what has happened since last year when executive were updated on the reforms, there have been a number of details published, which I'll just quickly go through and talk a bit about the local implications and then hand over for questions. What has emerged over the last few months has been locally some context on the way that the integrated care systems in the NHS and social care are going to be set up, and particularly would draw people's attention to 4 key planks that the draft constitution for our local integrated care system, Humber Coast and Vale, is going to be built on. The first plank are 6 places. So as of July this year, clinical commissioning groups and the geographies that they represent will cease to exist. And at the same sort of geographical level, there are 6 places in Humber Coast and Vale, of which City of York is one. There will be 4 provider collaboratives where groups of health and care providers, for instance, acute trusts or general practice, will be working together collaboratively. And then there are the 2 arms of the integrated care system, the Integrated Care Board and the Integrated Care Partnership. And the paper lays out a little bit about the proposed membership of those 2 bodies. Put in summary, the Integrated Care Board will be the body that really runs the NHS from a day-to-day perspective and will be accountable for the finance of local NHS services, accountable for commissioning all NHS care in the Humber Coast and Vale area at that highest levels. The Integrated Care Partnership is tasked with setting a strategy and a vision for local areas and for the region. And I guess in that sense, setting out what we want to achieve in terms of the quality and improvement of the quality of services and in terms of population health and improving population health. So those are the 4 aspects of the reforms and how they will look locally. The place-based partnerships will probably be the thing that members are keen to understand what they look like. We probably can't say with a huge certainty exactly what they will look like, but the paper makes its best effort to describe some of the options. From a governance perspective, there are probably 2 options for what a York place-based partnership would look like. It will either be a committee of the Integrated Care Board or a joint committee with the Integrated Care Board. And the paper lays out a little bit of the differences between them as far as we can understand it from an officer perspective in York. However, they're probably, fair to say, still quite a good degree of uncertainty, both which of those 2 we might be and for either one of them exactly what the implications would look like. The place-based partnership in York has been in shadow form for the last 9 months. It is called the York Health and Care Alliance. It probably will change and evolve as we go through this year, but having it in shadow form, developing those relationships, building the partnership, ready to receive whatever lands upon us from the government's way of arranging these things, I think it's been a positive thing to get those the partnership up and running. The paper describes a little bit about York Alliance, and just to note for members that it is currently a formal subcommittee of the Health and Wellbeing Board, and therefore the York Alliance publishes its minutes through the York Health and Wellbeing Board and updates to that board every time it meets. There's a section in the paper on the roles of the Health and Wellbeing Board in the legislation, and the Health and Wellbeing Boards are, if we believe the legislation to be really essential within the work of the Integrated Care Partnership, and in fact, all chairs of Health and Wellbeing Boards will be represented on that partnership. The paper also talks a little bit about the implications for the council of the changes. Obviously, we are not part of the NHS, but we are part of the integrated care system that the changes are meant to deliver higher quality and better integrated care. And we're a provider of many services, social care and public health services particularly, but we also are a key partner and have lots of interest in how in the city these changes are maximised, I guess, for the benefit of residents. And so we've noted some implications, and there are some direct ones around the way that we have some joint commissioning arrangements with the clinical commissioning group at the moment. We have some shared posts and some other factors we take into account, and then some indirect implications for us in terms of the NHS as a city partner and how we again maximise this for the benefit of York residents. And then at the end, the paper does refer to the draft constitution of the integrated care system. It's included as an annex. It is only in draft and has been consulted on. That consultation period has closed, and we've summarised some of the issues and the points that we as a city have made into Humber Coast and Vale about the constitution, particularly about the role of place and how we forge that strong that role for the York place-based partnership and make sure that the decisions that need to be are taken in York and don't become a regional tier with more influence over York, but without the representation that we think is relevant. So Chair, I hope that's a helpful summary, and very happy to take questions and participate in discussion on what's in this paper.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. Ian, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I just wanted to just add to what Peter has said, just to say that there is a lot which is still to be discussed and debated with the ICS, and I think hopefully the next few weeks and months will clarify some things. But I think, as Peter inferred, there's still a lot that we need to discuss to agree. So that work will clearly continue. Just in terms of one of those big issues will be how we deal with funding allocations between different bodies. You probably don't need me to tell you that the NHS system has generally been underfunded. So we just need to be careful in terms of that. But I think the final thing to say is this is a really huge opportunity for the council to be very significantly involved in the health system. The partnerships with our health partners over sort of the COVID period have really strengthened, and I think we start from a really strong base in terms of some very strong relationships between ourselves and the other health providers, and you don't get that always in other parts of the country. And so I think it's a huge opportunity, but we need to do an awful lot of work to make sure we get the benefits of this.
Thank you very much, Ian. Certainly, I very much welcome this update coming through to executive for the reasons that Peter and Ian have outlined, as these reforms are clearly incredibly important and potentially will have a huge impact on how health and council services are delivered in the city. I think many residents will ask, why are these changes being made now, particularly whilst still going through the pandemic? But as highlighted in the report, the process was kicked off by the government white paper, which was approved, which will effectively replace all clinical commissioning groups with integrated care systems by April this year. And some people will know that here in York, we already had the Humber Coast and Vale partnership, but with these reforms, that was then designated as an integrated care system back in 2020. And we can see from the diagram in the report in paragraph 10 that Humber Coast and Vale integrated care system will be directly accountable to the NHS for spend and performance. And as I've just touched on, work has been taken place to formalise that partnership with a draft constitution. And I'm sure colleagues and residents will be immediately concerned about the sizable geography of the entire Humber Coast and Vale system. And therefore, it is really, really important that within that structure, it enables local areas, places to have direct influence on health services and budgets within their patch. Already, I and colleagues, and I know the Health and Wellbeing Board, have written to the ICS to outline our clear view that York must have direct accountability to the ICS. We also believe that ICS board should include a representative of each of the 6 places from each local authority to ensure that places like York are involved in that strategic decision making so that we can work together to improve health services for our local population. There is obviously a lot more work to do and consultation needed on this issue, as well as further detail from the government. And I look forward to getting some of that clarity so we can make sure that we seize the opportunities for local residents. And we'll continue to bring updates on this topic. And I'm more than happy to reaffirm my commitment to work that through health scrutiny and to make sure that it continues to be cross-party focus moving forward. And then I can see that Councillor Runciman is next to indicate.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, may I thank Peter Roderick for presenting this report, as it covers a very complex and still emerging area of NHS reform. The objectives of the new system to provide more integrated services and strengthen prevention are, of course, laudable. My concern is that the changes may not add sufficient resource and stability to the system that our services so desperately need. The timing of this latest round of reorganisation and managerial changes is really rather unfortunate, as everyone within the health and care system is focusing on working together to contain the pandemic and address the pressures facing their services. There are already strong partnerships locally and regionally, and these can be built on, emphasising positive engagement, enhanced efficiency and greater effectiveness. However, the proposals set out by the government so far leave more questions than answers. This is in itself a major concern at a time when all those using health and care services and those working within them need clarity and support. Paragraph 31 is key, and this refers to the draft constitution, and members will see concern expressed about representation of York as a place in its own right. York has always been identified formally as a place, but if there is lack of representation without truly locally based system, it will be a concern for many colleagues and officers. A top-down approach for delivering services would not meet local needs and priorities. So focus must be on working to achieve a place-based system directly accountable to our residents and responsive to York's priorities. There also needs to be a strong and beneficial relationship between the Health and Wellbeing Board, which I chair, and the ICS. The Health and Wellbeing Board has already established priorities through local consultation, and these need to be incorporated by the new ICS. Integrated care systems should be a genuine partnership of equals between the NHS and local government. They need to be able to achieve their ambitious aims of improving health, as well as providing better and more integrated health and social care systems. Unfortunately, at the moment, this seems not to be the case under the present bill. There is yet more work to be done to establish the ICS, and I welcome progress so far and would welcome further consultation with partners, with councillors and with health scrutiny to ensure the new system works for York. Overall, whilst there are questions and reservations remaining about the details surrounding the restructure, it's clear that changes are inevitable, and it is for us to ensure that York and our residents' priorities are best served within the new arrangements. Closer working can bring about improvements to the crucial services on which our residents rely, and I sincerely hope that this is what will happen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Huntsman, and to Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief, as you've both spoken so eloquently. I think I really do welcome this paper as it flags up what is probably one of the most significant changes in the NHS for at least a decade, and starts to unpick some of the things that happened in the Health and Social Care Act of 2012. And this has predominantly happened almost entirely under the radar. So I'm very concerned in terms of what the public know and what the public are aware of. Issues such as the end of the commission provider split, which will be a massive shift in the way the NHS operates, and very little discourse has happened publicly or in the media to discuss this. So it really is important that this issue is aired and people have a chance to consider these issues. On the whole, there are many positives, as have been shown in this paper. Paragraph 14 is exactly the right approach. That thing of doing things locally wherever possible, at neighbourhood level, at place level, at system level. In fact, it was probably the Health and Social Care Act in 2012 that took away that system level with the abolition of strategic health authorities. And I certainly welcome that coming back into place. But I think, as Councillor Runciman said, paragraph 31 does highlight some of the concerns we have, and it does have to be truly bottom up in terms of the way these reforms happen and things happening locally where they possibly can. So I think that in itself, on that issue around involving the public, are the areas where we really wanted to flag. So on those basis, I was going to suggest an additional recommendation, 5C, which would read as follows. Given the importance of the topic and issues raised within the report, that the leader of the council, the chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board, the chief operating officer write to the ICS, NHS England and other affected local authorities in the region to highlight York's concerns. So this letter makes clear that as per NHS guidance, the place boards such as York should be the statutory subcommittees or joint committees of the ICB to whom delegation is passed. Any further delegation to other regional partnerships, such as York and North Yorkshire, must be agreed from place and not from ICB. That each place should be represented on the ICS board and ICS partnership, and that the recently announced pause be used as an opportunity to engage residents and groups with consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Eyre, for that suggested additional recommendation that we'll consider after this discussion. Councillor Kilbane, you might have put your hand down, but I think it was up.
It was. Thanks, Chair. My internet's playing up a bit, so I don't know if you can hear me okay.
Yes.
I wasn't going to contribute to this as leader of the opposition Labour group. I would like to say that we will work closely with local authority to make sure that we do get the best for York residents out of this arrangement. You know, the only things you can rely on in life is death, taxes and NHS reform, and I share the concerns that this is happening at possibly the worst time for the NHS at the moment, but it is what it is, and we will certainly work with the administration through scrutiny to make sure we get the best deal for York.
Thank you very much. I can't see any further comments on that. So in agreeing, the recommendations are in front of us. Obviously, with that additional recommendation as tabled by Councillor Eyre, can I please see all those in favour of that? Thank you very much. So that's a clear majority in favour of those recommendations as added to by Councillor Eyre to then be sent on to Ian. So we'll move on to the next agenda item now. Thank you, Peter, which is agenda item 8, city centre access security measures. This report starts on page 103, and I'll hand over to James to introduce it, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you'll be aware, the government has this week published the outcome of its consultation on the new Protect duty, which it consulted on last year. And the results of that consultation support the government's intention to place increased responsibility on the managers of public spaces in terms of being responsible for the prevention of terrorist attacks. In effect, it's a duty to listen and consider the advice of the counter-terrorism police. The report before you tonight is in response to the report that Executive received in November 2021, where Executive decided and determined to minimise vehicle access to the city's foot streets by regulation. And those decisions were made in response to both North Yorkshire Police and the North East Counter-Terrorism Police. This report doesn't seek to revisit or to change the decisions in November about the foot streets, but responds to it, as regulation alone will unfortunately not protect the public from a terrorist attack. Therefore, physical measures are necessary. This report focuses on those physical measures. So whilst the quality impact assessment contained within the report tonight reflects the decisions that have previously been made, and the impact it will have noticeably on some disabled people, and for some disabled people, it will indeed prevent access. The focus of the documents is on the impact of the decisions sought tonight, which is the installation of bollards. The report responds to the request from you at November's meeting and details in Annex D the additional restrictions on vehicles and those exemptions that were discussed, and proposes to commence a statutory consultation to remove those additional exemptions. And just to confirm that wheelchairs, which slightly clumsily are referred to as invalid carriages in the legislation, are exempt from those restrictions. And that includes both the self-propelled wheelchairs as well as the motorised ones. As you've heard from some of the residents within the foot streets tonight, it will not change the current permanent arrangement with their vehicle permitted access outside the foot street hours. Vehicles requiring access during the foot street hours will be limited as far as possible to emergency services, as we discussed last time. The report also details the proposed physical measures, and those are detailed in Annex A in order to give effect to the regulations that you agreed last time. There's a recommendation to yourselves to note and delegate the final locations to myself in consultation with Councillor de Gorn as the Executive Member for Transport as part of the detailed design. As you'll be aware, we received some unexpected funding from the Department for Transport after the budget setting process, and the proposal is to use some of that funding to top up this budget to match the current budget estimates for the works. The report also seeks permission to go out and start a procurement process so we can finalise the cost of these measures as part of that process. I think that probably covers everything that I think we need to cover off in terms of the report. I think there was a comment about an incident during the Christmas markets where a wheelchair user was prevented from passing one of the barriers. That was an isolated incident, and instructions were provided to the staff operating those barriers that wheelchairs should be allowed through those barriers. So apologies to the wheelchair user who did experience that, but that shouldn't have happened, and we did rectify that straight away.
Thank you very much, James. So I'll open this report for any comments and questions, and first to Councillor de Gorn.
Yes, I'd like to thank the officers for the work that they've done on this. And as set out in the report, this decision brings forward the critical measures to keep public safe that were first agreed by the executive as being necessary in, I believe it was February 2018. The procurement process, however, was halted during the first COVID lockdown in 2019, and temporary arrangements during COVID have allowed us refinement of first stage, refinements including the first stage of the actual installation of fixed bollards, which are now in place at the top end of Parliament Street. I think it's important to stress that the key decision today is implementing the location for fixed and movable bollards as set out in Annex A to encompass the areas of highest footfall. This includes all of St Helens Square and King Square, as distinct from the temporary arrangement which was put in place in 2019 with barriers across the middle of St Helens Square. In parallel with this, as has been indicated by James Gilchrist, that we are moving forward on the legal process, as in Annex D, to comply with the police advice to exclude all non-emergency vehicle access during the Foot Street hours, with provision for one-off waivers on a case-by-case basis for emergency repairs and so forth. So I would acknowledge, certainly want to recognise, as has been said, the difficulty of this decision in the fact that it does have, we acknowledge the impact it has on blue badge holders, but we have taken the decision, and tonight is very much focused on implementing the location for these hostile vehicle measures with it around the city centre.
Thank you very much. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. As noted in the report and in the preface comments, the protect duty is actively being discussed by ministers with the bid to place new legislative requirements on organisations to consider employee security measures at the vast majority of public places. So it's councils and venues who will have this additional responsibility, and it would be helpful for the government to set out what this will be in detail. There were commitments made at the last meeting in terms of discussing this in terms of engagement with the business community and with residents in terms of the locations and configuration of the permanent barriers, and it does need to be borne in mind the positioning of street furniture and utility boxes around those, because they will create restrictive spaces, and therefore that does need to be factored in. And I appreciate that officers do have a challenge dealing with utility companies with their powers, but I do think we do need to take that into consideration and ensure that the BID, the Retail Forum, Indy York, Federation of Small Businesses and Traders Associations are all engaged, whilst the final decision will of course come down to the experts within the anti-terrorism units. There are ways of ensuring that as much as possible the city can continue to operate, recognising that there is an overriding factor about the threat to crowded spaces by people with very negative thoughts. So I think it is important that there is a record of all of the work that's being done to respond to requests, and that the commitments made at the last meeting are regularly updated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waller, and to Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I get into the meat of this, it's been brought to my attention that at least 6 people have been excluded from addressing this meeting tonight. So 6 people tried to register and were not allowed to speak. And I know that at least 4 of those people would have been speaking against the decision that you're going to make tonight. Now, if we'd let all 6 people speak, that would have taken up about 25 minutes of your time. We are all paid by the residents of York to be here on this call, but apparently we couldn't spare them another 25 minutes, instead of which democracy is once again being thwarted and silenced by this administration. Included in those people were councillors who were elected to represent the people of York who similarly have not been allowed to address this meeting. In terms of this decision that you will make tonight, because we all know how you're going to vote, then what you are doing tonight is actually just entrenching discrimination within the city. So you are solidifying it. This is the approving the money to pay for permanent discrimination against disabled people in the city. It cannot ever be acceptable that we make parts of our city inaccessible to anyone because of who they are, and in this case because they happen to have a disability. I was going to go through the equalities impact assessment, but I think that's been done far more eloquently by the people who did manage to speak tonight. I do need to bring to your attention the fact that it does seem to be a little bit skewed. So when you talk about stakeholders, there's no mention at all of blue badge holders. When you talk about benefits for people with disabilities, you talk about a small group, you talk about a group of people with visual impairments, sort of once again, as we've seen through this whole process, trying to play one group against another, which has, of course, spectacularly failed in this case. You're also still relying solely on Article 2. I notice now, it has been pointed out to you on many occasions that, you know, when it comes to rights, in fact, I think one of the foremost human rights experts in the country has written to you pointing this out, that rights are in the balance. There are no trump cards. Article 2 is not a trump card. And as we heard one of the public speakers say earlier, you know, there seems to be no consideration given to Article 14, the right not to be discriminated against. It did occur to me that through this whole process, it does seem to be that you've picked particularly on blue badge holders, because they are the, you're still allowing other vehicles to access the city centre, but you've stopped those immediately. Now, when I questioned this, I was told that it was easier to stop all other vehicles from accessing the city centre, but because of the amount of consultation you felt you had to do with blue badge holders, that was more difficult to do. Well, if stopping the other vehicles was easier, and if they are as much of a risk, the question's got to be asked why you didn't do that first. And given that other vehicles are going to be able to access, I think we've got staff barriers until September, why that can't apply to blue badge holders at least until September, I don't know. And also, one of the questions that's been raised with me by people who've been excluded from the city is, you know, what's the difference in the level of risk between the areas that you've identified as being at risk and, say, the bridges, for example. So that's made me question where the risk assessments are for this. I don't think we've ever seen a comprehensive risk assessment that compared, for example, the terrorist threat to the city centre to that on the bridges. Of course, we need to protect our people. Of course, we need to protect our residents, and we are committed to doing that. But there are better ways of doing it, and that must be informed by risk assessments. I'm not even sure actually what in-depth briefings you have had from counter-terrorism experts. But anyway, I will finish just by echoing one of the public speakers tonight, who I think I think she said she used to be, or maybe even still is, a member of the Liberal Democrats, where she said for you to remember that permanent exclusion is only permanent for as long as you are in administration, and given that we aim to replace you in 17 months now, then I will say to everybody who's listening, who've had their right to access their city taken away from them, then we hope to be in power in 17 months' time, and we will address this issue with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. James, from within that, I wonder in particular the question about other types of vehicles and access to the city centre, whether you could pick up and respond to that, please.
Yeah, I'll respond to a couple of the councillor comments. So, yes, we've begun that engagement with businesses. We've focused primarily on the businesses out there who are adjacent to where we think the measures are going to go. We're doing some ground investigations in those locations at the moment. So they've been engaged already. And then as that firms up, we will consult more widely with businesses and residents in the city centre. As you know, as an executive, you've got a briefing with MI5 coming up in the diary. So that, just to reassure Councillor Kilbane, that was a decision made in November, and those are briefings that executive will now receive as per the exec decision back in November. In response to the other vehicles, the rationale behind that, Councillor Kilbane is right, was that obviously the definition of where the measures go is where the regulations apply to. The most sensitive regulation in that perspective was absolutely blue badge holders. That defines where other people are also limited to. So that's why we've done it in the order we've done it, because we know that there was that sensitivity and that equality impact that we needed to manage.
Thank you very much for that, James. And just to pick up the point on public speakers as well, I know you've had a couple of emails from me, Councillor Kilbane, which hopefully explains, but the normal process for executive and full council meetings is set out in Council Procedure Rule 14 within the Constitution, which gives a time limit for public participation of 30 minutes, which is the 10 registered speakers. And that was the advice that I received that we could follow and normally follow for these meetings. I would add to that as well that it is done on a first come, first served basis of those who register to speak with democratic services. If this is, however, an area that your group would like to change, you haven't put it forward in any of the conversations about the council constitution, which is where you would change that. And if your group wants to look to change that for the council, for full council and for executive, there is that working group through audit and governance, and your group could put it forward there. Very happy to have that wider conversation, but that's why we follow that normal precedent, not just here, but also at full council meetings with various Lord Mayors over time. Councillor Kilbane.
Yeah, as you know, Chair, I did raise this issue with you much earlier. You're chair of the meeting. In consultation with the monitoring officer, you could have raised the cap, as indeed you did at the last executive meeting, to allow the people of this city the right to make their voices heard at this meeting, and you chose not to. You chose to silence those voices.
Thanks, Councillor Kilbane. Again, I replied to you on that particular point as well, which set out that I'd received advice in the last meeting, which is why I was happy to do so. Had not received the same advice for this meeting or all meetings prior to that. as per full council and your Lord Mayors over various years, which is why we stuck to the rules as set out in the council constitution. But if that is something you'd like to change, your group hasn't put it forward yet or over many years, we'd be happy to discuss that with you. I cannot see any further hands up or questions. And as James has responded in summary to those points raised, we've got the recommendations and report in front of us, starts on page 103 to 146. Could I please see from colleagues those happy to accept those recommendations? So that's a clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you very much. That then takes us on to agenda item 9, which is the Groves and the future of low traffic neighbourhood trial. This starts on page 147, and I can see that Tracy has come onto screen, so I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to present this report on behalf of my housing team, but also on behalf of transport colleagues within the Place Directorate. So before the pandemic, the Groves was awarded external funding for a housing-led community engagement piece, which led to the development of the Groves Community Plan, which sets out the community's vision to create a more sociable neighbourhood, improving the health and well-being of residents by considering both physical interventions and increased community activity. The plan was finalised during the pandemic, but due to prioritisation of COVID response and recovery, it hasn't actually been formally published until this point. It explores the potential for new affordable housing, improved streets and public spaces, and local projects to involve residents. And the most significant and common concern raised by residents during the consultation was that the Groves is used as a common through route for cars. Residents stated how this brings noise, pollution, and creates a physical barrier within this small residential area. That consultation process led to the development of a proposal for a low traffic neighbourhood scheme. Groves is a residential area which has long experienced the impact of large volumes of through traffic, and this is evidenced by the incremental build-up of traffic restrictions and measures aimed at controlling through traffic over the last 30 years. York's agreed local transport plan encourages behavioural change to maximise the use of walking, cycling and public transport, to tackle transport emissions, to reduce the release of pollutants harmful to health and the environment, and enhance public streets and spaces to improve the quality of life, minimise the impact of motorised traffic and encourage economic, social and cultural activity. In June 2020, the Executive Member for Transport approved the implementation of an 18-month experimental traffic regulation order, an ETRO, in the Groves to prevent vehicles passing through the Groves, leaving it open to pedestrians and cyclists. The closures and traffic changes started on the 2nd of September 2020, and the 18-month trial period is now coming to an end, and a decision is required as to whether the low traffic neighbourhood trial is to become permanent or whether the roads are to be reopened to through traffic. The report sets out the community plan and asks members to note the content with further work to be undertaken to develop some of the ideas set out in that plan. And it also sets out the results of the formal public consultation on the ETRO and the technical assessment of the traffic impacts for consideration by Executive as they consider the recommendation to approve making the ETRO permanent with the changes to the scheme as set out in the report. Michael Jones is on hand to answer any questions about the community plan, and Hélène Végereau is in the meeting to answer any transport questions that members may have, including a response to the issues raised by the public speaker regarding ambulance service access to the area. And I recommend the report to you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and I'll now open it for any comments or questions from colleagues, and I'll go to Councillor de Gorme first.
Thank you. I'd like to very much thank the officers for the detailed report and welcome the recommendation. All the work that's gone into this project, both in the run-up to September 2020 and subsequently. Although this was implemented during the COVID pandemic, which has seen similar schemes around the country being implemented, the changes arose out, as you've heard, out of growing concerns from residents at the impact of through traffic on these streets, particularly at peak times. So in February 2020, shortly before the COVID lockdown, we had over 100 residents attended a big consultation event at Park Grove School, with several design changes arising from that being implemented as they were put forward by local residents during that meeting. These were introduced within the first 6 months to respond to some detailed issues, including better signage, adjustments to parking, and matters that arose, and that's the whole purpose of a experimental traffic order, was to give us that flexibility to adjust the arrangements in the light of experience. One positive aspect from COVID has been the raising awareness of the importance of active travel for health, coupled with a massive drop in air pollution, which was experienced when traffic dwindled during lockdown. This is something that I feel we can build on, both as part of a plan to cut carbon emissions from transport within our local transport plan and carbon reduction strategy, but also through supporting more walking and cycling to schools, local shops and services. We have to acknowledge that changing travel mode is easier for some than for others, but this landmark decision for the Groves enables more young people in particular to safely walk or cycle to school or to the nearest shops and develop a lifestyle which will benefit all of us and reduce obesity, setting them on the path for a more active lifestyle. I would like to support the officer's recommendations and recommend them to the whole executive.
Thank you very much, Councillor de Gaunt. Councillor Craghill.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd also like to welcome the recommendation to make this low traffic neighbourhood permanent, as Tracy has set out. As she said, this scheme arose out of a housing regeneration initiative, which began well before COVID. And from a housing perspective, I think it will greatly improve the quality of life for people in the Groves, as set out in the Groves Community Plan, which is part of these papers. I do think it's really important to remember what the traffic situation was in the Groves without the current closure points in place. At peak times and for large parts of the day, in fact, this was constant lines of traffic, through traffic, queuing on Lowther Street, Penleys Grove Street and Town End Street, often stretching the whole length of the streets. At these times, the sheer volume of traffic on the narrow road sometimes reduced everything to a standstill, but the uncertainty of whether or not a vehicle using the route as a cut-through would suddenly speed up, where it would make it very difficult for less confident or less mobile residents trying to cross these roads. At the same time, the pollution and the traffic noise was constant. At other times, there was a bit less traffic, but still a steady stream, with drivers cutting through, often speeding up whenever they could, making crossing even more difficult. In my view, this simply isn't appropriate or fair on a residential neighbourhood, a neighbourhood which, as the paper says, has a very strong sense of community and identity, but also includes many of York's most vulnerable residents. One of the most frequent responses to questionnaires or surveys about what will improve life in the Groves has always been a request for more community activity. The continuation of the quieter streets that encourage walking and cycling also supports greater sociability and the right environment to build on the many community initiatives outlined in these papers. And as the paper says, reopening the Groves narrow streets to through traffic would have a very negative impact on the progress we're making via the Groves Community Plan process. Of course, I appreciate that not everyone is happy with this change, although I would say that many residents have gone out of their way to tell me and to tell the council what a positive change this has made to their lives. It's true that reducing the dominance of vehicle traffic in our streets and neighbourhoods is never going to be an easy change to make, but we have to start somewhere. Inevitably, at least at first, most traffic, not all, but most traffic that can't go one way will go another way, and we will have to monitor and respond to that. But as officers have said, in transport terms, this is entirely consistent with our sustainable transport policies and the sort of changes we do need to make to tackle climate change. Just finally, in the Groves itself, I very much welcome the commitment in the paper to get rid of those awful concrete blocks and get them replaced with bollards as quickly as possible. That has always been the intention, but I do want to make that very clear that that is what is going to happen. And to make the signage improvements that are needed, as well as making the further small changes that may be required to respond to specific local issues. And yes, I would also welcome perhaps a response from officers to the point that was made about ambulances by one of the speakers, just to clarify that. So taking all that into account, I am very happy to support the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Crackhill. Tracy, I wonder if you could respond to that point, or a colleague.
Yeah, is it okay if I bring Helen into the meeting to respond to the engagement that she has undertaken with Yorkshire Ambulance Service about their access through the site, but also to access patients living within the Groves area? Helen.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you, Chair. My name is Helen Verger. I'm the Highway Development and Traffic Manager for the Council. Yes, in terms of the emergency services, we received several responses to the consultation throughout the trial. The latest responses were at the start of 21, and then we chased them again towards the end of last year. The ambulance service explained that there was no big issue. There was maybe some hesitance from some of the drivers initially because they weren't sure where the closures were, but they said that after a while, drivers generally knew where they were, so it was not an issue in their view.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kilbane.
Hi, thanks, Chair. Again, I've got to say it's absolutely scandalous that the local councillor, Councillor Fitzpatrick, has been barred from addressing this meeting on this subject. She's one of the at least 6 people that's happened to, because Councillor Fitzpatrick, being a Labour councillor, works the Groves a lot, and she knows what's going on the ground and the surrounding areas, and she talks to everybody there. So she would have been able to bring quite a lot to your decision-making session, as indeed it would have been if you'd actually published the objections that came in from members of the public, and note that they've been paraphrased into almost meaningless sentences in the annexes. So, you know, I don't think the silencing of residents' voices that I'm seeing here tonight is causing me some disturbance. I'm also a little bit alarmed by the increase in NO2 levels outside Haxby Road Primary. I think that's where the biggest increase has been, and the report says that, you know, you'll have to commit to future mitigation measures. Well, you know, that level of pollution outside primary schools isn't a question of some future mitigation. That needs to happen now, really. In general, though, we are in favour of low traffic neighbourhoods. Having had the pleasure of living in a low traffic neighbourhood for the last 20 years, I don't see if it's good enough for Bishop Hill, then it's certainly good enough for the Groves. The problem, as ever, is that there's just no joined up thinking with it. It's not part of a plan. Traffic does get displaced, and there's no plan to deal with the traffic that has been displaced, and no plan, it seems, to deal with the pollution levels outside the school. So while we obviously we welcome low traffic neighbourhoods in general, especially, you know, places where people live are places where people should live and enjoy where they live, and shouldn't be car dominated, but it needs to be part of an overall local transport plan that works, and we are still miles away from that with this administration.
Thanks, Councillor Kilbane. Tracy, don't know if there's any points there or Ellie you want to pick up on.
I think a general point on the local transport plan is we have one. It's already agreed. The principles of that are agreed. What we're actually looking at with LTP4 is a refresh of the delivery arrangements, but the hierarchy of transport model methods within the LTP3 is still current, and this report very much supports that. The Council's commitment to the increase in capacity on the outer ring road sets a principle which I think is underpinned by capturing the benefits to cross-city traffic in our local residential areas, and this is possibly the first of those moves to actually capture that, rather than increasing capacity and then letting it flow everywhere, to actually capture that expected benefit from that. So it is part of a longer term plan. This is clearly not my area. I'm not the director of transport. If Helen or James are still on the call who want to come in and address that broader strategic point, I'd probably welcome that.
Yeah, I think we've given it. I think Tracy's covered it. Maybe you should be director of transport, Tracy. I think there's an LTP that has on its front cover says it runs to 2030. This administration has asked us to review that. That work has commenced. That needs to be done in conjunction with the other pieces of work that are happening. But I don't think anyone would disagree with the principles, as Tracy has outlined, that actually the active modes of travel are currently at the top of our hierarchy and are likely to remain there for the future.
Thank you, Tracy and James. Councillor Kilbane.
Just to come back on a couple of points, if I may. One, that LTP is woefully out of date and in need of refresh, which has been acknowledged, and that can be clearly demonstrated by the fact that the dualling of the ring road that Tracy Carter referred to is certainly not part of LTP3. LTP3 is currently not fit for purpose. I think everybody would accept that. But the other question, I'm interested to hear what the Lib Dems on this call think of this proposal in particular. Councillor Widdowson, as executive member for climate change, are you welcoming this? Do you think it's a step in the right direction?
Thanks, Councillor Kilbane. I don't know, James or Tracy, you want to pick up anything about LTP3/4 and the York Outer Ring Road there, just for clarity?
I think there's a difference between what's in the plan and what's in the delivery plans. I'd need to double check the detail, but I'm pretty sure we referenced those things. But I would need to check.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Equally, just to pick up the point regards Councillor Fitzpatrick and thank her for her written comments that we gave the opportunity to submit, which have been circulated and as mentioned at the start will be attached to the minutes, which raise a number of points that Councillor Craghill mentioned on behalf of residents nearby, but does welcome the decision to continue the closure and the support of that aim of low traffic neighbourhoods. I cannot see any further comments or questions. So we have the recommendations in front of us that start on page 147. If I could please see all those in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you very much. That's a clear consensus and gives Councillor Kilbane an answer to another one of his questions with regards to that item. Thank you very much. That then takes us to agenda item 10, which is the provision of affordable homes on new developments scrutiny review. And we're going to be joined by colleagues Councillor Fenton and Councillor Pavlovich at this stage in the meeting, and thank you for waiting so patiently in the meeting room. This starts at page 345 and runs to page 360, and I think before I hand over to Councillor Fenton and Councillor Pavlovich, who are going to give us an update on their work, and before I ask if officers want to add anything, I'd just like to place on record our thanks for the work. We haven't had many scrutiny reviews through to executive. We know how much hard work goes in. So before you start, just to thank you for that. I don't know who I'm handing over to first, but to both of you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'll say a few words and then hand over to Councillor Pavlovic to fill in any gaps. This scrutiny review started, I think it's just over 2 years ago, and obviously, as we know, a lot has happened in the last 2 years, but it's good to be finally at the stage of presenting this to executive. I'd like to thank officers for their support, to the executive member, Councillor Craghill, for engaging with us on this piece of work, and to my Vice Chair, Councillor Pavlovic, obviously. I'd also particularly like to thank colleagues in other local authorities, in housing associations and a variety of other organisations who gave their time to speak with us very candidly and share information, which has been immensely helpful in shaping our thinking. This report is very much a product of cross-party working, and hopefully provides an example of how member-led scrutiny can support the effective functioning of a local authority such as York that has an executive model of governance. You'll have read the report and the recommendations, so I won't go through it all in fine detail. Probably just worth making the point that when we started this piece of work, I had a number of preconceptions perhaps about where I thought this would go and what we might be recommending. But much of that was turned on its head by the conversations that we had and the information that we gathered, which I think further proves the value of doing sort of detailed pieces of scrutiny to perhaps sometimes challenge our own thinking. In terms of some of the specific recommendations, recommendation 1, in the cost file work, we, through our conversations, heard about the popularity of shared ownership tenure types, both amongst registered providers, housing associations, and popularity amongst residents. But we were also mindful of the continued high demand for social rent housing in York. We identified the likelihood that the implementation of the government's First Homes initiative in York could mean that shared ownership homes being delivered through developer contributions as part of planning obligations under Section 106 agreements could be at the expense of homes for social rent. And with First Homes to account for 25% of these Section 106 homes, the proportion of homes for social rent is already due to fall from 80%, which is a current default, to 75% under the government scheme. And as such, we came to the conclusion that we do not believe that a further reduction from this 75% level would be appropriate at this time, given the continued high demand for social rent homes in York. On recommendation 4, we ask that officers review what steps can be taken to make it more likely that open space on new developments can be managed by the council, particularly on our own housing delivery programme sites. We feel this is important in reducing the risk of residents of new developments being saddled with high service fees. And from a community cohesion perspective, there is a risk of friction between neighbouring communities if communal space and facilities are quite rightly open to all, but the maintenance costs of those spaces fall on one section of the community. And so our recommendation reflects a desire to try and avoid these issues arising. Recommendations 5 and 6 have been informed primarily by discussions with registered providers and relate to a desire to reduce the risk of post-planning delays and strengthen pre-planning dialogue between the council and those registered providers. And we heard from officers that there's already work being done in these areas, which was pleasing to note. I'll finish there and hand over to Councillor Pavlovic, but obviously would be happy to answer any questions that might arise once you've heard from us both. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Chair, and hello, everybody. I'd like to echo Councillor Fenton's thanks to all those who supported us and gave of their time, and the very knowledgeable council officers who've supported the task review. And I'd like on our behalf to particularly thank Andrew Bebbington and Paul Landis-Stamp, with whom we first spoke and who have offered us invaluable support, advice, and willingly shared their contacts. Councillor Fenton has given some of the background to the genesis of this task review, and he's right that some of our recommendations are not the result of the ideas we originally had, which is why I'm happy that all the recommendations we're asking you to consider this evening are based on best practice from elsewhere and a wide number of interviews with diverse organisations. However, the one preconception we haven't moved away from, and which was echoed by private developers, housing associations and other councils, was that we are not delivering enough genuinely affordable housing, neither nationally nor in York. York Council will never be able to build enough to address the shortfall alone, but neither will private developers. And those that sit on planning will have seen that very often the Section 106 obligation for affordable housing is often reduced on the grounds of viability. Nor will housing associations, frankly. The problem in York is too acute for that, but we can each, singly and collectively, make a real difference. And that's why recommendation 2 suggests that the future housing delivery programme could be better delivered using a partnership model with housing associations who will provide markedly more affordable housing on council-owned sites than we currently do, and having spoken with them, are less impacted through right to acquire than we are through right to buy, which means that social housing remains social housing and can continue to meet the needs of those for whom private rented or house buying is out of reach. And we were particularly impressed by our discussions with Stockport Council, who, despite regularly changing ruling parties, have maintained their focus on delivering affordable housing at scale, using a combination of an ALMO, a housing development company, and a council house building programme, which allows them to manage their finances in a very focused way. I know that York has agreed to a housing development company, then dismissed it, but we feel that there's certainly mileage in reconsidering ways in which such an entity might work, particularly in areas such as the rented sector. So in conclusion, I thank the work that Councillor Fenton has done and that I have undertaken with him, which has been discussed fully with officers and with members of the Housing Scrutiny. It's taught us a great deal and led to a series of serious and evidence-based recommendations that I hope you will support. Thank you. And as Councillor Fenton says, we're available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you to both of you. So I'm happy to open it for any questions to Councillor Fenton or Councillor Pavlovich. If there are, Councillor Craghill.
Sorry, I don't really have a question. I just wasn't sure how quickly you were moving on, Chair. I just wanted to make a few comments.
Well, what I'll do is stay on Councillor Pavlovich and Councillor Fenton for a second. I'll just check whether Tracy or Janie is either housing or scrutiny hats want to say anything to add to what's been done. So I can see a no from Janie. Tracy, is there anything you'd want to add to the report?
Just in reflection of Councillor Pavlovich's last comments there about recommendation 2 to be working in partnership with registered providers to expand the bandwidth of affordable housing in the site in the city. That is something that we've already evidenced through our work on the disposal of our site at Sturdy Grove, and we continue to work actively with other registered providers to bring forward further opportunities for them to play a part in the combined activity of delivering increased levels of affordable housing in the city. And Executive should expect a report in the next few months, bringing forward further decisions for them to consider on that subject.
Thank you very much. So I'll then open the item for wider debate before we consider the recommendations. Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. I would first of all also like to commend Councillor Fenton and Councillor Pavlovic on all the work that they've done on this scrutiny topic. My understanding is that whilst the committee has obviously participated, as members of the task group, they have in fact done a great deal of the work on this. I think this is a very helpful piece of work that feeds into changes that are currently taking place in government policy and can also help us to further develop our ongoing work to support the delivery of as many affordable homes as possible. With respect to the recommendations, I think the first one in a way is the most specific in terms of recommending a planning policy position in response to the government's New First Homes programme. In principle, I would be very happy to support this position with a view to protecting the maximum possible percentage of social rented housing through the planning process. I've spoken to officers about how we will take this item forwards, and I understand that work is currently underway on our response to the First Home scheme and is generally consistent with this recommendation. So we will hear more about that in due course. With respect to recommendations 2 and 3, which reference the Council's own housing delivery programme, which Tracy has picked up on a bit, I think, I'm sure officers will be able to pick up more so on that through our regular reporting cycle on the housing delivery programme. I do think it is important to say that we are developing active working relationships with housing associations, considering where appropriate the sale of council land to help maximise delivery of affordable housing. And we've always been committed wherever possible to delivering numbers of affordable housing above and beyond the minimum 40% we've already committed to in our housing delivery programme, which is double the planning requirement. And as Tracy mentioned, this is the subject of ongoing discussions with Homes England. We have sold the land at Sturgey Grove to Joseph Rowntree Housing Association for affordable housing, and other potential conversations are underway, including possibilities for York Central. We're disposing of council land at Town Hall Library and potentially at Morale House for specialist affordable housing. And there's also an item on this agenda to dispose of some council land at Clifton Without Junior School for affordable housing. So I think we are very much taking up that agenda that Councillor Pavlovic has mentioned. Just with respect to the recommendation to explore how more open space on developments could be managed by CYC, which I think is what started this topic. I'm certainly happy to look further into this, and I'd agree that this would be an ideal situation in an ideal world, but we do have to identify financially viable models, as we have with the current innovative approach at Lowfield, where some aspects of the public realm are being managed by CYC and others by a local community organisation. And I think it will be helpful in that respect to pick up on the points at paragraph 21 in the report regarding the usefulness of a discrete block in a development rather than pepper potting to help tackle this service charge problem, and also take into account that council tax banding, as the paper says, can also be an equally challenging issue. And I'm sure that likewise we'll be able to pick up those points in recommendations 5 and 6. So I'm sorry if that's a little long, Chair, but I did want to engage with the proposals because I have been, as has been said, engaged with this process as it has progressed. And I'm certainly happy to approve the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Greco. Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Scrutiny Committee and especially to Councillors Fenton and Pavlovic for all the great work that you've done on this. It shows you what we can achieve when we all listen respectfully to each other and work constructively together. It's great. Just one question, really. Quite often we do get reports come before us and they are full of great ideas, but then they somehow get lost in the sand. So I'd just like to ask Councillor Craghill how we're going to measure outputs against these recommendations that she's accepted. How are we going to measure whether or not we're achieving them and whether or not we're achieving the things that this report has set out? What kind of timescales are we looking at? What kind of goals and objectives are we putting on it?
Thank you very much. I'm sure you might like to answer that, Councillor Craghill. Similarly, if you want to bring in either Tracy or Janie on a process question, please do. Councillor Craghill.
Well, I think my short answer is that I hope, from what I've just said in response, you'll appreciate I am very mumuch looking at this in terms of, implementing the recommendations and not just leaving them sitting there. I've given some indications on that. I think in terms of timescales, some things to do with delivering affordable housing have slightly longer timescales, but I would say those are also covered in the KPIs that we have and that we do regularly report on. Probably different responses to different recommendations. I think the bit about CYC, managing the public realm is perhaps a slightly different piece of work, but yeah, certainly I want to make the best of this piece of work.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us, and obviously it's seeking our approval of the review's recommendations. So if I could please see colleagues' indication that they're happy to accept that. So that's a clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Fenton and Pavlik, for joining us. That then takes us on to agenda item 11, contract extension. This starts on page 361, and I can see that Anita has joined us to present the report. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I do that, I'd just like to seek approval to amend this report to state that the provision of long-acting reversible contraception for contraceptive purposes will be available to all persons who meet the clinical criteria, and that the subsequent contract will also reflect this and the council policies, if that's okay.
That's fine. And just to check with Janie or Fiona, have you got appropriate note of that
yes,
slight amendment? You have, yeah.
Yes,
thank
Chair,
you.
I do. Yes.
That's lovely. Thank you. So this
can I just sorry,
on, love, yeah.
There's a bit of a delay for me. Sorry. Can I just give an assurance as well that I will ensure that the contract is amended to reflect the recommendation that Anita has just suggested.
Thank you. So this report sets out to seek approval to directly award a contract for the provision of LARC, which is long-acting reversible contraception, specifically for contraceptive purposes. Some people may be aware that LARC is also used in gynecological circumstances, but that is not covered in this contract, and to award that contract directly to Nimbus Care. So the provision of LARC is a statutory responsibility both for our local authority and also of the CCG, but we lead on that provision for the CCG under a Section 75 agreement. Now, the background to this is that we've previously gone out to tender for this provision, and we only got one suitable provider to provide equitable access for this provision across the city. We've no reason to believe that that's changed from then till now. And indeed, when we've consulted with North Yorkshire Council, they find themselves in exactly the same position, and they've come to the same conclusion on that as well. Now, the intention is going forward, there's two bits of the sexual health contract. There's the main provision, and then there's this provision for LARC. And going forward, the intention is to align those two contracts, and that'll come into play in 2024. Now, this gives time for the reconfiguration of the NHS, like we've heard previously. That's no mean feat in itself. And I'm sure people are aware, it's been said a lot of times, that because of the pandemic, the NHS is under severe pressure, and that can't be underestimated. Public health are under pressure, as is our colleagues across CYC, and that puts pressure on a full tender procurement process. The paper obviously acknowledges that there are risks to this way of doing things, but it's also acknowledged that the greater risk is having no provision. And, you know, we've consulted the appropriate people on this. We've talked to the CCG, we've obviously talked to Nimbus, we've engaged with this with our colleagues in procurement and our colleagues in legal. So the ask is that option 3 is approved, that we can award this contract directly to Nimbus Care without going through a full tender procedure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And open that item for any questions or comments, and to Councillor Runciman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful to receive this report, especially the description of the legal issues that are explored in so much detail. These issues are very complex and they are very thoroughly set out in the paper. Sexual health and contraception services are part of the key to the achievement of good health and well-being, prioritised in the council plan and in the joint health and well-being strategy for the city. Therefore, given the timescales involved and the ongoing pressures on the public health team from the coronavirus pandemic, as described in paragraph 2, directly awarding a further contract with Nimbus Care is the simplest way of ensuring that the council delivers its public health statutory responsibilities for sexual health and contraception services. As is made clear in paragraph 41, if the council were to go out to tender, this would probably not generate any kind of meaningful competition, as Nimbus Care are likely to be the only provider interested in this opportunity, or even the only one capable of delivering the council's service requirements in this instance. Balancing the risks as described in paragraph 60, it would seem the greatest risk is if the service were not to be provided at all. Therefore, I'm happy to support option 3 as recommended in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Runciman. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. Anita, can I just check the amendments to the language? Is that to make sure that it's not discriminatory against transgender people? And if that's the case, can we make sure that that runs all the way through the contract? So can we make sure we audit the contract to make sure that it is transgender inclusive?
Yes, certainly, and yeah, it is. And apologies if it's gone out in a way that it offends anybody, but we will certainly make all the necessary amendments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So I'm obviously asking colleagues to support the recommendation that's outlined on item 11 as amended, as we heard at the start of the meeting. So could I please see all those in favour of that? Thank you very much. That's clear consensus in favour of that. And thank you, Anita. That then takes us on to agenda item 12, which is the Future Libraries Investment Programme. This starts at page 383, and I can see that Andy has joined us. So I'll hand over to you to introduce this, please.
Thank you this evening. This report is seeking members' approval for a £7.7 million capital investment into council library assets that will result in a brand new library learning centre for Clifton, a new co-located gateway library for Haxby and Wigginton at Oakham Grove, and enhancements to the existing Oakham Library Learning Centre. The plan for both Clifton and Haxby and Wigginton Library are shown in the report annexes and have been widely subject to public consultation. Residents' feedback has been really positive, with over 90% in favour of the proposed development plans at both locations. ACOM consultation will take place later this year. The overall programme of investment will bring a breadth of benefits that are described in the report and explores delivery of the council's key outcomes across the city and within local communities. This includes learning and skills, literacy attainment, digital inclusion, health and well-being, culture and creativity. And just as an example, explore are central to the city's cultural strategy by having spaces of varying sizes that are fully flexible, bring the community together and encourage the co-production and creation of cultural activity at the heart of local communities. In addition, the programme will deliver on council plan priorities, a greener and cleaner city. So the replacement of the existing Clifton Library provides the opportunity to reduce building emissions by installing green heating solutions. A better start for children and young people. Libraries play a key role in providing activities for children and young people, working hand in hand with children's services. The provision of flexible space for partner tenants, such as Snappy, that we've heard from this evening, and the home tuition service. Creating homes. So this project prioritises the use of vacant land to develop new homes with a focus on affordable and low carbon. And safe communities. Libraries are seen as safe and neutral places that provide quality information and advice. Reading cafes are a key feature of all Acomb, Clifton and Haxby and Wigginton libraries that support the vision of libraries as community hubs, having a role to tackle social inclusion by providing a neutral place where people can meet and engage in activities. I'm not going to cover all the detail of each individual library project, as it's clearly set out in the report with a section for each library describing the proposal, the benefits, co-location partners, and the operational business case. But happy to take any questions on any of the detail. The capital financial summary can be seen at table 1, and it's worth highlighting there are a number of property and legal related recommendations that will allow reinvestment to make the programme balanced, and these are clearly set out in recommendations A to H, with further recommendations L to M. The timetable set out in the report would see Haxby and Wigginton Library delivered first by autumn this year. Clifton will be delivered by spring 2024, and Acomb proposals will be driven by the public consultation starting at the end of this year. I wanted to just take this chance to formally thank a number of partners who have supported the development of this proposal to date. So we've got the trustees at Oaken Grove welcoming the co-location of a library within their community centre, and the time spent by the trustees as volunteers working with me for over the last 18 months. Hope Centremoor Learning Trust for their collaboration and support the proposals process by being available for residents to ask questions and sharing the vision for a library learning centre and the benefits of working together that we can bring. Explore for leading on the public engagement, as well as co-designing these new library proposals with the council and partners to ensure they are customer focused and support the long-term vision for modern fit-for-purpose library spaces. Clifton partners, for example, Snappy, Home Tuition Service, Adult Learning and Accessible Arts, sharing their ideas and enthusiasm on how to co-locate or simply work together to make their offers better for local residents. And parish councillors and local ward councillors have also shown real interest and helped inform the project team about local issues and views. Now, in response to the speakers this evening, I wanted to just mention the hedgerow on Fairway, and mention that paragraph 36 of the report was included in recognition of residents' concerns I'd personally spoken to and listened to during the rounds of face-to-face public consultation about the ecology of the former Clifton Without Junior School site and the protection of the trees and hedgerow. Paragraph 36 acknowledged that any sale along lease of the proposed housing development site will be required to adhere to all statutory permissions governing the development of the site, including planning conditions such as tree protection orders, landscaping, and character of the scheme. It is not the council's intention to design and build the affordable low carbon homes itself. Therefore, the council will not be responsible for submitting the detailed planning application for the housing development site, which is where the hedgerow is in question located. However, for assurance, I will explain what paragraph 36 means in terms of considering the ecology of the whole site. Before any planning application can be submitted, the project team will appoint an ecology consultant to carry out an independent preliminary ecological appraisal. This appraisal will be carried out in accordance with current guidance. It will be undertaken by qualified professionals experienced in ecology surveys with an understanding of the nature conservation legislation and planning and recognised by a relevant professional body. The appraisal would make recommendations for design options to avoid significant effects of important ecology features, identify mitigation measures as far as possible, and identify enhancement opportunities. In addition, the appraisal may identify where further surveys for specific habitats or species are required. The appraisal and any subsequent surveys will also consider the ecology value of the hedgerow as per the hedgerow regulations 1997. The completed ecology survey results will then be required to be submitted with a full planning application to allow the planning team and the planning committee to consider any conditions to protect the ecology of the site. In line with the National Planning Policy Framework, development will also be needed to provide biodiversity net gain. The development will be required to take account of the enhance the biodiversity and wildlife interest of the area, and to contribute to and enhance the natural and local environment by minimising impacts on and providing net gains for biodiversity, including establishing coherent ecological networks that are more resilient to current and future pressures. A biodiversity enhancement plan will be required for approval by the local planning authority prior to the commencement of the works. To reassure the executive, the project team have and will consider the full site's ecology, and early interventions shown on the proposed site plan include a new hedge along the full boundary between the new library and the housing site, which will provide a new wildlife habitat with ecology benefits, as well as visual screen. Also, the intention is to have a green flat roof on the library with wildflowers and grasses to promote the ecology on the project. In conclusion, at this stage, the council has certainly not said that the removal of the fairway hedge is required, but we recognise residents' concern and the correct surveys will be carried out. In relation to the other speakers' comments about the design ideas for the housing development site, we will be able to enforce public consultation on the selected buyer leaseholder. So when they start the design of the housing development site, they will be required to carry out public consultation to allow residents' ideas and voices to be considered, as well as continuing to talk to us as a project team. So finally, all the recommendations are set out in paragraph 2. And I'm joined by Mark Wilson and happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll open the report to any comments or questions from colleagues and go to Councillor Smalley first.
Thank you very much, Chair. This administration has been absolutely clear about our commitment to libraries in York, and the decision tonight is just about the £7.7 million investment in our libraries is just the latest evidence that we continue to deliver on that commitment and secure the long-term future of these community facilities. I was in a local government association meeting just yesterday with the Arts Council England and British Library, talking amongst other things about library provision across the country. It was absolutely fantastic to be in a position to talk about our great partnership with Explore, our 15-year contract, our 15 libraries, and 3 reading cafes across York. And finally, to tell colleagues from across the UK about this brilliant proposal here tonight. In so many cities and counties, libraries have been an easy target for short-sighted cuts, and I'm proud that we're booking that trend again today. The library vision consultation identified residents' key aspirations, ambitions and principles. They want community hubs with partners present that link to community needs. They want to be able to access services on their doorstep and support a move away from standalone buildings to thriving, lively spaces with multiple activities, events and cafe facilities wherever possible. I'd like to echo Andy's thanks of all the community partners of Clifton, Acomb and Haxby and Wigginton projects for their hard work, and it has been many months and many hours and long evenings in supporting to bring this vision to life today. And I look forward to much further progress being made on these exciting proposals in the coming months. I'd just like to take a moment to thank our public speakers. Sarah has done a fantastic job in leading this work on behalf of Explore, and also thanks to Anne for her comments this evening too. Snappy do much vital work to support children and young people across our city, and we can never thank Anne and her team enough. But I am pleased that these proposals for Clifton today will ensure that Snappy have a purpose-built home fit for the future generations. On Angela's comments, I entirely agree with reference to the climate emergency and making sure we do everything possible to retain as much habitat, trees, hedges as possible. On the point about idling on Fairway and Rockcliffe Drive, yes, I've spent a large chunk of the last year walking around and seeing the location and obviously chatting to residents, and it is a problem, and we are picking that up separately as water councillors, and agree with the localised flooding, especially at the bottom of Fairway towards the spigot with Water Lane. Regarding Anne's comments on making sure the housing is appropriate, we have a fantastic legacy of housing in that area in Clifton Without, from the Roundtree houses to more modern developments such as Ouseley. We need to make sure that whatever goes on that site is absolutely co-designed with residents and make sure that we have something to be proud of and a legacy to leave to future generations, particularly making sure we've got appropriate housing for older residents in our community as well, as you mentioned. Just finally, and I know Andy, you've covered it very well in terms of the hedgerow on Fairway, but in response to public speakers tonight and the public petition that was presented to me on Tuesday this week, seeking the council to protect the hedgerow, which is the boundary of the proposed housing development site in Fairway, I hope that officers' comments introducing this report do give assurance that the council will do its part in protecting the hedgerow as far as possible. I would also like to say that tonight's proposal is the start of the conversation around what housing should be on that site, and there will be many, many more opportunities for residents locally to shape the site to make sure that we can all be proud of that development for decades to come. I would say, as Andy has, that paragraph 36 of the report was included exactly in recognition of residents' feedback on their concerns about ecology and the protection of trees and hedgerow, and that came clearly through both of the public consultations that were led by Explore in the last several months. Paragraph 36 makes clear that any sale or long lease of the proposed housing development will require to adhere to all statutory permissions governing the development of the site, including planning considerations such as TPOs, landscaping, and the character of the scheme. Moving on to my final comments now, Chair, but as Andy has said this evening, the PEA will be undertaken by qualified professionals experienced in an ecological survey with an understanding of nature conservation legislation and planning. This will be an independent process that will be able to guide recommendations for design options to avoid significant effects on important ecological features such as the fairway hedge, and identify mitigation measures as far as possible and identify enhancement opportunities. Having said this, I am mindful, as has been said by speakers, that there is room to enhance this report to make clear that the Council's and Executive's commitment to protect the hedgerow along the fairway as far as possible. And with that, I think now is probably an appropriate time for me, Chair, I'm aware we've got another speaker, but for me to move a very slight amendment to the paper, if that's okay, and I'll just do that now. I have sent it to the monitoring officer, so we've got a written copy as well. My proposal would be to amend paragraph 36 so that from what it currently reads, it would now read: the purchaser of the site will be required to adhere to all statutory permissions governing the development of the site, including planning considerations such as ecology, brackets, which shall include an objective to retain the majority of the fairway hedgerow, close brackets, tree protection orders, landscaping, all other ecology issues, and the character of the scheme. And reflecting that change in paragraph 36, I'd like to make sure that the recommendations at the start of the paper reflect that. And so in paragraph 2D, at the end of that paragraph, I'd like to add comma, including the requirements set out in paragraph 36. I hope that alongside that amendment I've proposed tonight, our verbal commitment to maintain as much of the hedgerow as practically possible will show the residents concerned that their views have been heard very clearly today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And to Councillor Waller next.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to recognise the report's further investment in Acomb Library, on top of the roof repairs which took place relatively recently, and that this forms part of the council's investment in the Front Street area to recognise the desire from the community there. In some respects, this starts to answer a long outstanding issue with relation to the closure of the Acomb Housing Office almost 10 years ago, that there hadn't been a satisfactory solution to the need for an open desk, which would also be available for use by police, citizens' advice, and to further enhance the range of activities at the Learning Library, and to enhance the work being done with local schools to support literacy in the vicinity. And again, it encompasses the plot of land behind the library, which was purchased a decade ago. There are some outstanding drainage issues to resolve, and aware that Anti-Leslett is working on that. People think that York is very flat. Actually, Acombe isn't, and there's a multitude of layers in that vicinity. So this timetable does enable there to be a clear resolution with Yorkshire Water and other parties to ensure that that land becomes available as open space in an area which needs more open space. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair. It's really good news that after a couple of earlier false starts, Haxby and Wigginton Library is to be located at Oaken Grove Community Centre. Although it's been a long wait, I know that local residents and school children will welcome the new library in this location. All three Haxby and Wigginton ward councillors would like to thank all concerned in bringing the project to fruition. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cuthbertson. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. Broadly welcome the support for libraries in the city. They are great places and a boon to their communities. I just do have a few questions though. One is, if Acombe's the easiest to do, why is it number 3 on the list? Why is it bottom of the list? In terms of the report, we can see on page 400 that that you're taking £880,000 out of the education funding for basic needs and SENS. Now, £180,000 of that has been allocated to demolishing the old school. I'm just wondering what is the benefit to basic needs and SEND, special educational needs, of spending £180,000 demolishing a business. That seems to be a tenuous link at best. So I wouldn't mind an answer to that question. It might be me, but I can't find anywhere in here how much we expect to get for the site of the old Haxby Library. I would like to ask the Section 151 officer, given the comments on page 401, 56 to 58, whether or not she's happy with the level of borrowing, the 5.3 million that's being borrowed in order to see this programme through, and whether or not she's happy with the ring fencing of the capital receipts for spending solely on the library's project. And then just finally, less of a question, more statements really. I am concerned that we are selling off our land on the open market. Land is the most valuable asset that we have, and we need to be making sure we find ways to provide 100% affordable housing on any land that we own for future generations, because once it's gone on the open market, it's gone. And also I remain unconvinced by Councillor Smalley's commitment to the hedge. I think saving as much of it as practically possible could mean just saving a metre of it, really. So, you know, what I would say to people, if you want to save the hedge, you need to be talking with us at Labour. Thanks.
I might have missed it, Councillor Kilbane. Did you support the library investment and these schemes in and amongst what you
right back
said there, or would you rather we didn't make those improvements and investments?
I could see people nodding off during my little speech there, Councillor Aspin, and maybe
Possibly.
you were one of them, because right at the start of it, I said we broadly welcome
broadly do welcome
in libraries. Yeah, I think, yeah. Actually, it's been recorded, isn't it? You can play it back and see. But yeah, I have a number of questions that I would like the answers to.
I'm pleased to just confirm, because sometimes you would have missed that support for the principle of the development and bringing about these changes to the community that we are delivering, and that you are not. Couple of questions there. I wonder whether Andy...
We're not in power. I don't know if you've noticed.
As I said, that you are not.
Yeah, because we're not in power, are we? We'd be doing far more if we were.
Councillor Kilbane, it's not a conversation. So there were a couple of questions...
Don't slag me off in the middle of it then.
There were a couple of questions there. Let's all be nice and polite to each other.
Okay,
Andy,
well, you set the tone. You set the tone.
Thanks, Councillor Kilbane. So Andy and Debbie, I'll go to you first, and then I'll check any councillors might want to come in afterwards. Andy.
Yeah, no problem. I have noted these questions. Hopefully I'll answer them all. So in terms of the order of development, Haxby has obviously been without a library since 2016, a permanent resident. So it's really important that we focus and deliver on the Haxby scheme as soon as possible. The next priority is Clifton, because Clifton is the furthest from the vision that we want for our library learning centres, and we'll take more investment, as the report says, to deliver that. So we want to get ahead of that one. So ACOM is just as much a priority, but with the resources we've got, we will be doing it in that order. In terms of the page 400 and the table that breaks down the educational needs funding, the 880,000, the contribution to the enabling and demolition works was always identified and from the educational budget, because it was originally an educational site. So it was allocated for that reason. And in terms of the Haxby Library value, that's not coming into this project. It was noted in one of the comments that in one of the recommendations that it's going back into the corporate pot, and remember there's an annex with the value of the valuation of that land in one of the annexes. So that's my bit. I'll hand over to Debbie.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. So in response to the question about whether I'm happy with the level of borrowing and the ring fencing of capital receipts, I don't think it's necessarily for me to be happy with it. Executive are allowed to make this decision, and it is within the parameters that are allowed in terms of affordability and prudential borrowing. So it's clearly a decision that executive can make. I have set out in the report those areas of risk. So that's to say, because it's affordable, it's not without risk. And I think that's clear in the report. And I would hope all the members on the meeting this evening understand the level of risk, particularly in light of inflation and some of the other risks we've set out there in terms of scope creep. So it will require very careful monitoring and very good programme management. But it's a decision that executive can make.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smalley.
Yes, I think Andy and Debbie have made an awful lot of what I was going to say, actually, but I guess just to make the point that if the Clifton site I'm talking about had remained in the housing delivery programme in its entirety, then exactly that enabling works in terms of infrastructure, paying for education funding, that was always, as Andy rightly said, the case, and has always been expected, and that's exactly why education still, for instance, maintained the fairway hedge. Now, perhaps when, in terms of some of in terms of your comments, Pete, whilst you broadly welcome it, when I received my copy of Rocklin and Clifton Without Labour Matters, I think they very much welcome it. And so I'd hope that the Labour group continue to support the Clifton project, the Haxby project and the ACOM projects. And in terms of a previous comment, just because we do listen to what you say, when you said there were 17 months until the local elections, there are actually 16 months until the local elections. So perhaps when the York Learning courses are up and running, the new Clifton Library, you might like to attend some of them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kilbane, I'll let you come back.
I mean, is this seriously supposed to be the level of debate that you're having as a serious administration?
Is this a question or a comment?
No, I'm just glad that Councillor Smalley's reading the Labour leaflets, and obviously my role here as the leader of the opposition Labour group is to ask questions. They may be difficult questions of the executive to make sure that the people of York are, for one, getting best value for money. And I think there are some serious questions now around the level of indebtedness that you're committing us to that we've just heard there. So, you know, that's the role of the opposition, of the leader of the opposition group to do, and I think that's what I'm doing, and the people of York would expect me to.
Thank you very much. But again, to confirm, you support the investment and the projects.
Councillor Ashton, what I'll do is I'll go back to the YouTube video, right, and I'll get the bookmark of the point where I said it, and then I'll send it to you, and then you can download it and play it to your heart's content. Of course, we support libraries in the city. They're great institutions. There's great centres of local communities, and after all, it was the Labour administration, I think, that set up Explore, wasn't it? That's now taking these things forward.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us that start on page 383. We also have that suggested amendment that's been put forward by Councillor Smalley. So can I please see those who are in favour of that as amended? So that's a clear consensus in favour of that. Thank you very much. That then takes us on to agenda item 13, which is urgent business. I've not been told that we have any urgent business this evening, so I'd just like to thank everybody, officers, councillors, public participants, and those watching for attending today, and we will see you all at our next executive soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye.